He bought yellow tulips for a woman who never showed up. He sat through an entire dinner alone, surrounded by strangers, wearing his best shirt, checking his phone every 4 minutes like a man waiting to be put out of his misery. And then he went home, bouquet in hand, pried somewhere on the restaurant floor, and walked straight into the one conversation that would quietly demolish every wall he had spent 2 years building. He didn't know it yet, but the rejection that felt like the worst moment of his year was actually the beginning of something he hadn't let himself want in a very long time. If you've ever found love in the last place you thought to look, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels, and if it moves you, hit that like button before we're done. Now let's begin. The tulips were Evan Mercer's idea, which, in hindsight, explained a lot. He had picked them up from the flower cart outside Meridian Station on his lunch break, a Tuesday, gray and damp, the kind of afternoon that made the whole city feel like it was waiting for something that wasn't coming. Yellow tulips, not roses, because he had thought yellow tulips felt lighter, less pressure, the kind of flowers that said, "I like you enough to show up properly without screaming, I've been thinking about you every day for 3 weeks." He was 32 years old. He knew better than to scream. The woman's name was Dana Calwell. They had met 6 weeks earlier at a friend's birthday dinner. She was seated across from him, worked in urban planning, laughed at something he said about city parking that genuinely wasn't that funny, and then gave him her number on a paper napkin because she didn't have a business card. He had found the napkin in his jacket pocket 2 days later and stared at it for a full minute before texting her. They had grabbed coffee once, talked on the phone twice. Both conversations had gone long enough that he'd had to step outside whatever room he was in to keep going. She had seemed real to him in a way that felt rare. Not perfect. Real. So he bought the tulips. He made a reservation at Alderman's, the kind of restaurant where the lighting was low and the menu didn't have prices on the version they handed the women. A detail Evan found faintly ridiculous but tolerated because the food was genuinely good and the booths were private. He ironed his navy shirt. He left the apartment 30 minutes early to make sure he wasn't late. He was seated at the table at 7:14. At 7:22, his phone buzzed. "Hey, I'm so sorry. Something came up with work. Complete emergency. Can we reschedule? Really sorry." He read it 3 times. The waiter came over, cheerful, a young guy with a burgundy tie that was slightly too short. "Can I get you started with something while you wait?" Evan set his phone face down on the table. "She's not coming," he said, "but I'll stay." He wasn't sure why he stayed. Maybe because leaving felt worse than sitting there. Maybe because he had already paid for parking. Maybe because some stubborn, idiot part of him thought that if he just ate the meal anyway, it would prove he was fine, that this was a minor inconvenience and not the latest entry in what was becoming a deeply discouraging personal record. He ordered the lamb. He drank 1 glass of wine, then a second. The booth next to him held a couple celebrating something, anniversary maybe, and the woman kept touching the man's hand across the table in that unconscious way people did when they'd been together long enough that touching was just breathing. Evan watched them for a moment and then looked at his plate. He was not a man who felt sorry for himself easily. He had learned, through the specific education that only genuine loss could provide, that self-pity was a room you could wander into and never find the door out of. He didn't linger there. But tonight, with the yellow tulips propped against the chair across from him because he hadn't known what else to do with them, he allowed himself about 30 seconds of it. "This is embarrassing. You're 32 years old eating alone with flowers. What exactly are you doing?" Then he flagged down the waiter and asked for the dessert menu because he had ironed his shirt and driven across town, and he was going to have the chocolate tart if it killed him. He got home at 9:47. The building was called Hartwell Arms, which sounded more distinguished than it looked. A 6-story brick building in the Kelmore neighborhood with a lobby that smelled faintly of old carpet and the specific brand of pine cleaner used by the overnight cleaning crew. The elevator was slow. The hallway on the 4th floor had a light that flickered in cold weather. Evan had lived there for 14 months, which was long enough to know all of this, and to have stopped noticing most of it. He fumbled with his keys at the door to apartment 4C, still holding the tulips, and pushed it open. The apartment was warm. The kitchen light was on. From somewhere past the living room came the smell of something, garlic and something buttery, and the low sound of a podcast or a documentary playing on a laptop with the volume turned down. "You're back early," said Isabella Sterling, without looking up. She was at the kitchen counter in a worn gray sweatshirt and pajama pants covered in small geometric shapes. Diamonds, he thought, or maybe some kind of abstract pattern he had never looked at closely enough to identify. Her hair was up in a messy knot held by what appeared to be a regular pencil, not a hair tie, and she was sitting cross-legged on the counter the way she sometimes did when she was reading something that needed her full attention, laptop balanced on her knees. This was the thing about Isabella Sterling that no one who had only seen her name in financial publications would have believed. In private, she was completely, thoroughly, almost aggressively ordinary. On paper, or on a screen, or on the cover of Meridian Business Monthly 2 years running, she was a 30-year-old self-made billionaire. The founder and majority owner of Stellarwell Technologies, a company she had started in a borrowed office space at 24 with $60,000, and a specific, infuriating certainty that the infrastructure software market was being underserved in ways that seemed obvious to her and inexplicable to everyone else. She had been right. The company had grown in ways that people who covered tech for a living described using words like staggering and unprecedented, and Isabella had spent most of the last 6 years either ignoring those descriptions or mildly annoyed by them. She did not live like a billionaire. She had a penthouse she barely used, a driver she felt guilty about, and a financial advisor who sent her quarterly reports she read once and then filed in a folder she rarely opened. What she actually wanted, what she had quietly and almost desperately wanted since the company's valuation crossed a number that made her name known in rooms she had no interest in, was normalcy. Specifically, the particular kind of normalcy that came from living somewhere ordinary with someone who didn't know her net worth before they knew her last name. She had found Evan through a mutual friend, Dara Ewan, who had mentioned offhand that she knew a guy looking for a roommate who was serious, kept the kitchen clean, and had a kid but did pickups and drop-offs on a reliable schedule, so the apartment was quiet most mornings. Isabella had said yes before she asked anything else. That had been 11 months ago. Now she looked up from her laptop and registered the tulips. Her expression shifted, not dramatically, but the way a person's face shifts when they're recalibrating. "Are those for me?" she said, and there was something in her voice that was almost teasing, but not quite. "They were for Dana, the urban planner." She canceled. He set the tulips on the counter, still wrapped in the florist paper. 8 minutes before dinner. Isabella closed her laptop. 8 minutes. 7:52 p.m. I got the text when I was already at the table. She looked at him for a moment with the particular kind of focused attention she brought to problems she was actively thinking through. It was a look he had seen her direct at a lot of things: contract language, a faulty piece of code her team sent her, the specific question of whether the pasta water had enough salt. And he had learned over 11 months that it meant she was deciding something, what to say, how to say it. "Did you eat?" she asked. "I stayed and had dinner. Alone. With the tulips." Something moved across her face that he might have called a wince. She uncrossed her legs and slid off the counter. "Sit down." "I'm fine." "I know you're fine. Sit down anyway. I made pasta." This was the other thing about Isabella that publications didn't report. She cooked. Not well, exactly. Her repertoire was narrow and specific, built around 5 or 6 dishes she had learned from watching the same cooking videos repeatedly until she stopped burning things. But she cooked on evenings when she was working late, and she always made enough for 2, and she never mentioned it directly. She would just leave a covered pan on the stove and a note that said pasta or soup. Or once, "I attempted risotto. Eat at your own risk." He sat down at the kitchen table, which was small and round and had a scratch along one edge, from when they had moved it from its original spot near the window to its current spot near the wall. She put a bowl in front of him. Penne with something tomato-based and a generous amount of Parmesan that she had definitely added from the block rather than the can, because she had strong feelings about the can. He ate. She poured him a glass of water without asking, sat down across from him, and reopened her laptop without looking at it. "What happened with the work emergency?" she said. "She didn't say." "You believe it?" "I don't know." He stabbed a piece of pasta. "It doesn't actually matter." "It does a little." "Fine. A little." He ate another bite. It probably wasn't an emergency, but I also don't think she owes me an explanation. We had coffee once. You talked on the phone for 2 hours. How do you know that? Because you were standing outside my home office for 40 minutes, and then you went to the living room, and I could hear the low talking through the wall. She said this without accusation, just as a factual accounting. You liked her. I thought I might. Yeah. She nodded slowly, like she was filing this away next to something else she had already been holding. Was she worth the shirt? He looked down at the navy shirt. The shirt was a bad call. It's a good shirt. I ironed it. I know. You were ironing it this morning at 7:15, and I could smell the steam from the hallway. He almost laughed. Not because it was funny, exactly, but because that specific detail. The steam from the hallway, the fact that she had noticed the steam from the hallway, the fact that she was now telling him she had noticed the steam from the hallway, was so perfectly, ridiculously Isabella that it cut through something he had been carrying in his chest since the phone buzzed at the restaurant. I am a very sad man, he said. You're not sad. You're disappointed, which is different. She pulled her laptop closer. There's more pasta. I'm good. There's also tiramisu. I got it from that place on Carver Street. You got tiramisu. I was having a long day. She didn't look up. I got 2 portions. He looked at her for a second. The pencil in her hair, the sweatshirt with the small hole in the hem that she had been meaning to throw away for 4 months, the slight downward tilt of her mouth that meant she was either reading something complicated or thinking about something she wasn't saying. He had cataloged all of these things without ever deciding to. They were just part of the furniture of his daily life now, part of what the apartment felt like. Thank you, he said. For what? For... He gestured vaguely at the bowl, the kitchen, the general arrangement of the evening. This. She looked up briefly. Her expression was not quite soft, but it was not quite neutral either. It was something in between that he did not have a precise word for. You don't have to thank me, she said. You'd do the same. He would. He had, actually, 3 months ago, when she had come home from a board meeting that had apparently gone badly enough that she had walked in, dropped her bag at the door, and sat down on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet. He had made tea, because he didn't know what else to do, and sat on the floor next to her for 40 minutes while she talked about the meeting in the clipped, controlled way she talked about things that had actually gotten to her. And he had listened and not tried to fix it, which she had told him later was exactly right. They had always been like this. From the first month, there had been an ease between them that he recognized as unusual. Not the easy ease of 2 people with nothing to lose, but the specific ease of 2 people who had both been through enough that they knew how to be careful with someone else's life. How to be present without being intrusive. How to make space. It had felt like a gift, honestly. After 2 years of navigating a world that felt slippery and strange, coming home to this apartment and this person had felt like having solid ground under his feet. He had not once let himself think about it as anything more than that. The subject of Evan's daughter came up because it always did eventually when the evening got quiet enough. Her name was Cora. She was 5 years old. She had her father's brown eyes and her mother's stubborn mouth and a personality that was already, at 5, showing signs of becoming fully and specifically its own thing. Opinionated about certain foods, deeply committed to a stuffed elephant named Gerald, and capable of an extended staring contest that most adults broke first. She lived primarily with her mother, Nadia, and came to stay with Evan on Tuesdays and every other weekend, plus a full week during school holidays. On the nights Cora was there, the apartment changed. There were crayons on the coffee table, and a specific protocol about which cartoons were acceptable, and a careful ritual around bedtime that Evan executed with the kind of precision he applied to very few other things. On the mornings Cora was there, he woke up earlier and made scrambled eggs, and there was always a cup left out on the counter that she had used for juice and set down somewhere he wouldn't expect. Isabella was, in Cora's world, simply Bella. Not a billionaire. Not a business mogul. Just Bella, who sometimes had candy in her desk drawer, who had once sat on the living room floor for an entire afternoon helping Cora build a cardboard box city that had taken over most of the rug, and who could do an impression of a very indignant seagull that Cora had found so funny she had actually fallen down. He didn't think about this too hard the way Isabella was with his daughter. He noticed it. He noticed everything about how she moved through the apartment, through their shared life, through the small daily machinery of their arrangement, but he kept those observations at a certain remove, filed them in a category labeled "Reasons This Works," rather than anywhere that might lead somewhere complicated. He was good at keeping things in the right categories. He had been doing it for 2 years. "How's she doing?" Isabella asked now, still not quite looking at him. "Cora?" "Good. She lost her second tooth this week. She's devastated because she can't bite apples. She called me about that." He blinked. "She called you?" "She has my number. I gave it to her." A slight pause. "You know that." "I know that." He did know that. Somehow, in the particular geography of their arrangement, it had stopped feeling unusual. "What did she say?" "She wanted me to confirm that the tooth fairy still pays for baby teeth, even if you swallow them by accident, which apparently she did not do but wanted to know in theory." A small smile, barely there. "I told her I'd look into the policy." He watched her for a moment. The small smile, the pencil in her hair, the quiet efficiency with which she had managed, in the span of about 20 minutes, to make his thoroughly humiliating evening feel manageable. "Isabella," he said. Can I ask you something?" She looked up. "And you don't have to answer." "Okay. Have you ever—" He stopped. Tried to figure out how to say the thing he was saying without it landing in the wrong place. "Do you ever wonder if you're waiting for something that you haven't actually let yourself want yet?" The question came out differently than he had intended. He had meant it philosophically, or abstractly, or in some way that was clearly about himself and Dana Calwell and the pattern of the last 2 years, rather than about them sitting here in this kitchen at 10 p.m. with cooling pasta and tiramisu from Carver Street. But it sat in the air between them, and he wasn't sure it had landed the way he meant. Isabella set her laptop down fully this time. She looked at him with the recalibrating look, and then with something underneath it that was harder to name. "Yeah," she said after a moment, "I think I do wonder about that." "It's a weird way to live," he said. "It is." "You get good at it, though." "You do." She pulled at the hem of her sweatshirt, the motion small and unconscious, a person touching something without realizing. "That's maybe the problem." He didn't push it further. He wasn't sure why. Something in him registered the weight of where that conversation could go and chose, as he often chose, to step around it rather than through it. He got up, rinsed his bowl, came back for the pasta pot. "Leave it," she said. "I'll do it." "I've got it." "You've had a terrible evening." "I've had a boring evening. It wasn't even terrible enough to be interesting." He ran the water. "The lamb was good." She sat there watching him wash the pot, and he was facing the sink, so he didn't see whatever expression she was wearing. But he felt, in the specific way he had learned to feel things about this apartment and this person, that the room was quieter than usual, heavier, like something had shifted weight in a direction neither of them had officially acknowledged. "Evan?" she said. "Yeah." A pause, long enough that he turned to look at her. She was sitting with her hands flat on the table, looking at them. Then she looked up. Her face did the thing it occasionally did when she was about to say something she had been rehearsing. Not nervous exactly, because Isabella Sterling was not easily nervous, but braced. Like she was standing at a ledge she had calculated she could clear. "The tulips," she said. He looked at the counter, where the yellow tulips were still in their florist's paper, slightly wilted now around the top edges, petals beginning to lean. "What about them?" "They're pretty. They were a bad idea." "I don't think so." She held his eyes for a moment and then said very quietly, very simply, "I wouldn't have turned you down." The words were so small, and they hit him like a door swinging open in a wall he hadn't known was there. He stood at the sink with water still running over his hands, and he looked at her, Isabella in her sweatshirt and her pencil and her geometric pajamas, sitting at their small scratched kitchen table, and for a long moment he did not say anything at all, because he understood exactly what she meant, and the understanding arrived not as a surprise, not really, but as a recognition. The specific feeling of seeing something that had been in front of you for a very long time, that you had been carefully, deliberately choosing not to see, because you weren't sure what would happen if you did. He turned off the water. He dried his hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle. He sat back down at the table, and the night, which had started as one of the more forgettable disasters of his recent adult life, began to become something else entirely. But before that moment, before the tulips and the quiet confession and the way the kitchen felt afterward, there was everything that had made the moment possible, everything that had been building, without either of them naming it, across 11 months of shared ordinary life. The first week, he had thought she was going to be a terrible roommate. She worked at hours that didn't correspond to anything recognizable as a schedule, sometimes up at 5 a.m. on a call, sometimes still at her laptop at 2 in the morning, sometimes gone for 3 days, and then home for 2 weeks without leaving the building. She received packages almost daily from a range of sources that suggested her professional life touched about 30 different industries simultaneously. She had very specific opinions about where things went in the refrigerator that she had communicated to him on the second day via a hand-drawn diagram she had taped to the inside of the fridge door, like a field map for a small tactical operation. He had found the diagram both irritating and deeply funny in a way he hadn't been able to explain. By the end of the second week, he had decided she was probably fine. By the end of the first month, he had decided she was actually someone he was glad to know. She was direct without being harsh, a combination he had found more rare than he expected. When she had something to say, she said it. When she didn't fill the space with noise. She had a way of listening to him that was full and complete, and he had noticed early on that she almost never looked at her phone when they were in the middle of a conversation, which was such a small thing and yet felt, in the current order of the world, almost pointed. She was also, consistently, funnier than he would have guessed from her professional reputation. There was one evening in the second month. They were watching a documentary about competitive bonsai cultivation, which they had found while looking for something else, and had been too puzzled by to stop watching. And she had made a comment under her breath about one of the exhibitors that was so perfectly timed and so specific that he had laughed hard enough to spill his drink. She had looked deeply pleased with herself. "I was a competitive talker in college," she had said, "never a competitive bonsai person, but I know timing." He had said, "You were not a competitive talker in college. That's not a thing." She had said, "It's very much a thing. I won regionals." He had spent a week trying to verify this and had never successfully determined whether she was serious. These were the moments he filed in the Reasons This Works folder: the documentary, the regional story, the fridge diagram, the way she always made slightly too much food, the way she had, without comment, started buying the specific brand of coffee he used when she was placing grocery orders, even though she drank tea. He had noticed the coffee thing. He had noted it and kept going. The thing about Evan Mercer was that he had learned, via a lesson he had not wanted and would not have chosen, to be careful with hope. Her name had been Jessa. They had been together for 3 years, engaged for the last 8 months of it, and the way it had ended, not dramatically, not with a fight or a betrayal, but with a slow and painful recognition on both their parts that they had built something that looked like a life together without actually being one, had left a particular kind of damage. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that settled into the walls of how you moved through the world and made you flinch at things that should be ordinary. He had flinched at Dana Calwell, if he was honest. Not enough to stay away. He had pushed through the flinching and texted her and made the reservation, but enough that some part of him had been half expecting the cancellation, had on some level made peace with it before it came. This was what he didn't talk about mostly. He talked around it. He made jokes about his track record with dating apps and his inability to successfully read women's signals, and the time he had shown up to a date on the wrong night due to a calendar error that he preferred not to revisit. But underneath the jokes was the real thing, the thing he was still carrying, the fear that he had made some fundamental error in his original assessment of how relationships worked, and that until he figured out what it was, he was going to keep getting it wrong. He had talked about this once with Isabella, late at night, after the third date in 2 months had quietly collapsed. He had not intended to say much, had in fact intended to say something brief and self-deprecating and then change the subject. But she had asked him a specific question, the kind of question that cut directly to the center of something rather than orbiting around it. And he had found himself saying more than he planned. She had not tried to reassure him. She had not said, "You'll find someone," or "the right person is out there," or any of the phrases that people said with the best intentions and that always landed on him like small flat stones. She had said, "I think you're more afraid of getting it right than getting it wrong." He had sat with that for a long time afterward, turned it over, looked at it from different angles. He hadn't agreed with it immediately. It had struck him as slightly too clean, too neat, the kind of insight that sounded good without necessarily being true. But then he had kept sitting with it, and eventually he had understood that she meant something very specific, that he was more comfortable in the role of the person recovering than the person arriving. That rebuilding was a mode he knew how to operate in, that standing in something good, something real, something that required him to stop treating himself as a work in progress, that was the part that actually scared him. He hadn't told her she was right. He had said, "That's an interesting way to look at it," which was, he recognized, a very Evan Mercer way to receive a truth he wasn't ready to accept. She had nodded. Let it go. She was good at letting things go. She never pushed. He had found this, over time, both a relief and a quiet frustration. Because sometimes he wanted her to push. Sometimes he stood on the edge of something he wasn't saying and waited to see if she would come looking for it. And she never did. She waited for him to decide, which was either the most respectful thing anyone had ever done for him or the most infuriating. And some days, it was both at the same time. Otek. Cora had noticed first. This was not surprising, because Cora noticed everything and applied to those observations the unfiltered and often devastating logic of a 5-year-old. It had happened about 6 weeks earlier. Cora had been at the apartment for a Saturday visit. They had made pancakes, which was the Saturday ritual, and then done a jigsaw puzzle that Cora had abandoned 2/3 of the way through in favor of reorganizing all of Evan's shoes by color. And Cora had come into the kitchen to find both Evan and Isabella at the counter, standing close together in the specific way two people stand when they are both reading the same recipe off one phone screen, heads slightly tilted toward each other. Cora had looked at this arrangement for a long, assessing moment. "Are you two boyfriend and girlfriend?" she had asked. Evan had said, "No, we're roommates." Cora had considered this. "But you like her." "I like everyone in this apartment." "You like her like you like pasta." Isabella had turned away to inspect the cabinets with great concentration. "That's not a category," Evan had said. "You have pasta 4 times a week," Cora had said, with the expression of someone making a completely airtight argument. "That's a lot." He had redirected the conversation to the jigsaw puzzle, which he had deeply regretted abandoning because the question had circled back to it 3 more times before dinner. On the drive home that evening, he had thought about pasta. He had thought about it more than he would have liked to admit. Now, sitting at the table across from Isabella, who had just said, "I wouldn't have turned you down," in a voice that was quiet and steady and completely without drama, the voice of someone who had been waiting to say something for a long time and had simply, finally, decided to say it, he felt the category reorganizing itself. He started. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "I want to." "You don't have to do it right now." He leaned forward. "Isabella." She looked at him steadily. The thing about Isabella's face when she was being honest was that it became very still. Not blank, but still, the way a surface goes still when the movement underneath it has stopped, because everything is now on the surface instead. "How long?" he said. A short pause. "A while. A while like a few weeks, or a while like I noticed I was jealous when you talked about Dana Calwell, and I had to have a conversation with myself about what jealousy meant." She said this plainly, looking at the table. "That was in March." March. 4 months ago. He sat with this. "I'm not," she said, "I'm not telling you this to make things complicated. I know what this is. You live here. Cora's here twice a week. I'm not interested in blowing up something that works because I couldn't keep my mouth shut." She pulled at her sleeve again. "I just thought, after tonight, after you came home with those tulips, I didn't want to keep not saying it." He looked at the tulips on the counter, slightly wilted now, a little lopsided, still genuinely, stubbornly yellow. He had bought them for a woman who had canceled 8 minutes before dinner. He had brought them home. She had been here. I talked to Dara about it, he said slowly. Isabella looked up. What? About whether it would be a terrible idea to think about you differently. He said it carefully, like he was measuring the weight of each word before he placed it. She told me I was an idiot. Isabella went very still. She told me that, he said, in June. The room was quiet. Outside, somewhere far down the street, a car went by with music playing, bass thumping against the night. There and then gone. Isabella pressed her lips together. Then, in a voice that was carefully controlled but not quite controlled enough. Why didn't you say anything? Because I didn't know if I was reading it right. Because I've been reading things wrong for 2 years and I was... He pressed his hand flat against the table. I was scared. Of what? Of being wrong. Of being right. Of... He shook his head. Both. Both of those things. She was quiet for a moment. You're not wrong, she said. He looked at her. In case that's the part you need to hear. Her voice was even. Her eyes were not. You're not reading it wrong. The yellow tulips leaned slightly to the left in their wrapper. Evan Mercer, 32 years old, single father, bookstore manager, man who had ironed his shirt for a woman who never showed up, looked at his roommate of 11 months and understood, in the way that certain understandings arrived, not like lightning, but like a light you had been sitting in so long you had stopped noticing it was there, that he had been in exactly the right place for a very long time. He just hadn't let himself know it yet. That tiramisu, he said. Isabella blinked. What about it? Can we have it now? Something broke open in her expression, not dramatically, but real, like a window being opened in a closed room. It's from Carver Street, she said. It's very good tiramisu. Then let's have it. He pushed back his chair. And you can tell me what exactly competitive talking involves. She slid off her stool and went to the refrigerator, and when she turned back around, she was smiling. Not her professional smile, not the measured one he had seen in her press photos. The real one. The one with the slight asymmetry on the left side that happened when she hadn't decided to smile yet, when it just arrived on its own. I placed second at nationals, she said. I knew regionals was a deflection. I maintain regionals was an impressive achievement given my schedule. What were you talking about competitively? It's more interesting than it sounds. I doubt that. She set the tiramisu on the counter and looked at him across the small kitchen in the apartment they shared, in the middle of a Tuesday that had started as a disaster and become something he didn't have a word for yet. Stay up and I'll tell you, she said. He did. They stayed up until almost 2 in the morning, not doing anything significant, which was maybe the most significant part. They ate the tiramisu. It was, as advertised, very good, the kind that had actual espresso soaked into the layers rather than the watered-down approximation most places sold. And they talked. About competitive talking, which turned out to be an actual collegiate debate format that Isabella had genuinely excelled at, and which she described with a level of enthusiasm that suggested she had been waiting for years for someone to ask. About the documentary they'd watched 3 months ago that neither of them had stopped thinking about, the bonsai one, which had apparently spawned a whole quiet obsession in Isabella's peripheral attention that involved 2 books she'd ordered and not finished, and a small juniper tree she had purchased and then nearly killed and then revived through what she described as a combination of desperation and YouTube. About Cora's missing tooth and the tooth fairy policy question, and the fact that Cora had also, at some point in the last month, asked Isabella to teach her how to negotiate, which had sent Evan into a long silence that Isabella had interpreted correctly as the silence of a parent who was simultaneously proud and terrified. They did not talk about what she had said, not directly, not in a way that required either of them to label it, or decide what it meant, or figure out what came next. It was there in the room with them. The words she had said, the things he had said back, the mutual acknowledgement of something that had apparently been quietly accumulating in both of them for months. But they circled it the way you circled something fragile, aware of it, being careful. When he finally said goodnight and she said goodnight and they went to their respective rooms, he lay on his back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep for a long time. He wasn't anxious, exactly. It was more that his mind kept returning to the specific sequence of the evening. Dana's text, the restaurant, the tulips, the kitchen, the tiramisu, the 2 a.m. conversation about a nearly dead juniper tree. And the contrast between how it had started and how it had ended seemed almost too large to process cleanly. He had walked in carrying someone else's flowers, and something that felt very much like the accumulated weight of all the ways the last 2 years had not worked out. And then Isabella had said 5 words, and the weight had shifted in a direction he hadn't been prepared for. I wouldn't have turned you down. He fell asleep somewhere around 3. The morning was awkward. He was prepared for this, or told himself he was prepared for it, which turned out to be different from actually being prepared for it. He had gone to sleep with a version in his head where they were both adults who had said honest things and could now proceed normally, and then he woke up at 7:15 and heard her in the kitchen and had to lie in bed for an extra 4 minutes figuring out how to stand up and walk out there without it being strange. It was slightly strange. Not badly. Not in a way that suggested anything was broken. But the specific ease they usually moved through the mornings with, the shared kitchen, the coffee, the half-conversations that happened over the counter while one of them was checking email and the other was trying to remember if there was bread, had a new texture to it, a slight self-consciousness, like both of them were aware, in a way they hadn't been yesterday morning, that the other person was watching. Isabella was at the counter with her tea, reading something on her phone, and she said morning without looking up, which was normal. He said morning back and went for the coffee, which was also normal. The coffee had already been made, which was also normal because she was always up before him. He poured a cup and stood at the counter. "How'd you sleep?" she said. "Fine," he said, which was a lie, but a small one. "You?" "Fine." A beat. "The juniper looks better this morning, for what it's worth." He looked over at the windowsill, where the small juniper tree sat in its terracotta pot, and it did look marginally more alive than it had yesterday. "You talk to it again?" "I don't talk to it." "You absolutely talk to it." "I speak near it." "That's different." She turned a page. "There's eggs if you want." This was the thing. She was trying, in the specific Isabella way, to make it easy. To offer him the normal morning, the eggs, the juniper commentary, the space to step back into the routine without anyone having to make a declaration about what the routine meant now. He recognized it and appreciated it and also found it, in some unnameable way, slightly maddening, because he was not entirely sure he wanted to step back into the routine. He was not sure what he wanted. He had woken up at 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. and 6:40 a.m. thinking about what he wanted and had not arrived at a clean answer. He made the eggs. They sat at the table. She read. He drank his coffee and looked at the juniper. "I want to take you somewhere," he said. She looked up. "Not today. I have work. But this week." He set the cup down. "A proper somewhere, not the kitchen." Something moved through her expression. Not surprise, or not only surprise. Something more cautious than that, more careful, like she was making sure she was hearing what she thought she was hearing before she let herself react to it. "Okay," she said. "Saturday? If you don't have work, I have a call at 9. I can move it. You don't have to move it. I'll move it." She looked at him steadily. "Where are we going?" "I don't know yet. Somewhere that isn't the apartment." He picked up his cup again. "Give me until Thursday to figure it out." She nodded, went back to her phone, but the corner of her mouth had done the thing. The slight asymmetry, the real smile arriving before she had decided to smile, and he caught it before she looked away. He ate his eggs. The morning was still slightly awkward, but it was a different kind of awkward now, and he had the thought, somewhere between the eggs and the second cup of coffee, that different was not the same as worse, that sometimes awkward was just what honest felt like before it settled. He told Dara on Thursday. They worked together. Dara Ewan was the assistant manager at Meridian Books, the independent bookstore on Kelmore Avenue, where Evan had managed the floor for 4 years. She was 35, professionally allergic to subtlety, and had been asking him pointed questions about Isabella for approximately 8 of the 11 months they had lived together. She had, as he had mentioned to Isabella, Told him he was an idiot in June. She had phrased it slightly more diplomatically than that, but the content had been the same. He found her in the back room repricing a box of remainders and said, "Something happened." Dara put down the pricing gun. "With Isabella." "How do you—" "Because you just said something happened like that, with that face." She gestured at his face. "What happened?" He told her. The dinner, the cancellation, the tulips, the conversation in the kitchen, the tiramisu, the 2 a.m. competitive talking discussion, the morning eggs. Dara was quiet for a moment. "She said she wouldn't have turned you down." "Yes." "And you said, I told her that I'd talk to you, that I'd thought about it in June. And then you ate tiramisu and went to sleep. And talked about a juniper tree." Another pause. "Evan, I know. That is simultaneously the most romantic and most infuriating thing I have ever heard. I'm taking her somewhere Saturday. Somewhere like a date. Somewhere like a date." Dara picked up the pricing gun, pointed it at him, and then set it back down. "If you somehow find a way to mess this up," she said, "I will never forgive you. And I say that with full knowledge of your track record." "Thank you, Dara. Very helpful. I'm serious. This woman has been—" She stopped. "She's good for you. I watched you for almost a year come home to that apartment and talk about her like she was just your roommate, and I could tell every single time that it was not entirely true." "I know," he said, and he did know. The knowing had been there for a while, quiet and insistent, underneath all the careful categorizing he had been doing. He had known, and he had kept choosing not to know, and last Tuesday night it had run out of patience with him. "Where are you taking her?" Dara asked. "I'm thinking about that place in the Hendricks Park area, the one with the outdoor tables by the water." "That's a good call." She picked up the pricing gun again. "Wear the navy shirt." The navy shirt had a very bad Tuesday. The navy shirt didn't fail. The occasion failed. "The shirt is fine." She pointed it at a remainder. "Go, I can finish this." He went back to the floor, and for the rest of the afternoon he shelved a returned shipment of literary fiction and helped a woman find a gift for her daughter and answered 3 emails about the store's monthly reading event. And underneath all of it, persistent and warm and slightly terrifying, was Saturday. The problem arrived on Friday. It arrived in the form of a phone call from a number Evan didn't recognize at 6:40 p.m., while he was standing in the produce aisle of the grocery store trying to decide between 2 kinds of apples for Cora's weekend visit. He answered it out of a vague professional instinct and heard a voice say, "Mr. Mercer? This is Clark Benton. I'm a journalist with the Meridian Financial Observer. I was hoping to get a moment of your time regarding Isabella Sterling." He went still in the produce aisle. "I'm sorry," he said. "What's this about?" "We're running a piece on Ms. Sterling's recent real estate transactions, specifically some of the lifestyle choices she's made that are, shall we say, atypical for someone of her profile. We've been made aware that she's been living in a residential apartment in Kelmore for the past year, and we have information suggesting she has a male roommate." A pause with editorial weight. "We thought you might want to offer some context before we go to print." Evan stood there for a moment. He looked at the apples. He thought about the specific tone of this call, the atypical lifestyle choices, the "we have information," and felt something cold and straightforward settle in his chest. "I don't have any comment," he said. "Mr. Mercer, I think you have the wrong number." He hung up. He stood in the produce aisle for another 30 seconds. Then he grabbed both kinds of apples, a decision he did not think through, and went to find his cart. He called Isabel on the way home. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, I'm in a call. Can I—" "Someone from a financial paper called me, Meridian Financial Observer, a Clark Benton. He knows you live in Kelmore and that you have a male roommate." A silence. Then, clearly, the sound of her standing up and moving somewhere more private. "What did he say?" "He said they're running a piece, called it Atypical Lifestyle Choices." Evan pulled into the building's parking structure. He asked if I wanted to offer context. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I didn't have a comment and hung up." A longer pause. "Okay." Her voice was different now. Not the kitchen voice, not the morning voice. This was the other version, the one he heard rarely but recognized immediately, flattened and precise. thinking fast. How did he get your number? I don't know. I don't know how he got any of it. Someone told him. She was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry. I'm sorry he called you. I'm not worried about me. What does this mean for you? It means I need to make a call. He could hear her moving. It's manageable. This has happened before. Reporters occasionally surface the Kelmore thing. We have a legal team that handles it. A breath. Are you okay? I'm fine. I wanted you to know before anything else happened. Thank you. I mean it. A pause that was different from the others, softer around the edges. I'll explain everything tonight. Give me an hour. She was home in 45 minutes. He had made dinner by the time she got back. Nothing ambitious, pasta again, because it was what he had and because there was something in the repetition of it that felt right, felt like a decision to stay inside the normal of what they were, rather than let one phone call knock them sideways. She came in looking tired in a specific way. Not physically tired, but the kind of tired that came from spending 45 minutes on the phone, managing something that should not have required managing. Her jacket was off before the door closed. She dropped her bag on the bench by the door and came directly to the kitchen. It's handled, she said. Our legal team talked to their editor. They won't run it. Good. He stirred the pasta. How? They didn't have anything solid enough. Someone tipped them, but the tip was vague. They knew I was in Kelmore. They knew I had a roommate. They didn't have names or details or anything worth publishing. She sat down. They were fishing. Who tipped them? I have a guess. She pressed her fingers to her temple. There's someone on my board. A man named Holt Rennick. He's been managing partner since before I founded the company, technically, who has been unhappy about some of my recent operational decisions. He thinks my lifestyle should look a certain way. The penthouse, the driver, the appropriate socializing. Her voice carried the specific flatness of someone describing something they have described many times and found consistently exhausting. He's made comments. What kind of comments? The kind that are technically about brand image, but are actually about him wanting a CEO he has more visibility into. She dropped her hand. He's not dangerous. He's just annoying and occasionally petty. Evan brought 2 bowls to the table. Has he done something like this before? Once. 2 years ago, there was a thing with a gossip column. Nothing stuck. She looked at the pasta. Thank you for making dinner. You want to talk about it more, or you want to eat? Eat first. She picked up her fork. Then maybe talk. They ate. Outside, the evening traffic moved along the street 4 floors below, the ordinary ambient sound of the city cycling through its nighttime. The juniper on the windowsill had definitely improved. 2 of the branches that had been drooping were now holding their angle, and the color had moved from the yellowed distress of the previous week toward something closer to actual green. Isabella had not mentioned this, and he had decided not to bring it up because she had enough going on. Halfway through the bowl, she said, Does it bother you, the possibility that this could become visible? He set down his fork. Does what specifically bother me? Me. My profile. The attention that comes with it occasionally. She was looking at her bowl. Dana isn't the first woman to cancel on you. I've wondered over the last few months if the reason some of those dates didn't go well was because people found out who I was and what that might mean, living with me. I don't think that's what's been happening. You don't know that. No, he said, but I also don't think that's a reason to not try something. He picked his fork back up. I'm not someone who scares easy. She looked at him. You scared easy about me. Fair. That was different. How? Because you're not some abstract risk. He stopped. Tried to find a word that was honest without being so heavy, it changed the temperature of the room. You're real. That's the part that was scary, not the profile. She absorbed this, set down her own fork and sat back in her chair and looked at him in the way she sometimes did when she was deciding whether to say the next thing. I've been in 2 relationships, she said. Both of them ended because the men in question had ideas about what being with me would look like that didn't match what it actually looked like. One wanted access. The other wanted me to be quieter about the company so he could feel less. She made a brief gesture. Whatever. The point is, I know what it looks like when someone likes the version of me they imagine, and I know what it looks like when someone likes the actual one. And which one am I? You, she said plainly, have spent 11 months watching me kill a juniper tree. You've seen me on calls where I'm not nice. You've seen me at 2 in the morning when I'm frustrated and I don't want to talk about it. You've seen me eat half a jar of peanut butter standing at the counter because I forgot to eat lunch. She picked up her fork. You are not operating under illusions. He thought about the fridge diagram, the specific 3-day silences when she was in a difficult stretch at work. The morning she had come home from an overnight trip, and he had been up early enough to see her walk in the door with her blazer over her arm, and the particular look on her face that said the trip had not gone the way she needed it to. He had made tea. She had sat on the floor. No, he said, I'm not operating under illusions. Good. She ate another bite. Then Saturday should be straightforward. Something in his chest loosened slightly. You're still coming. I moved the call. She reached across and took the last piece of bread from the board in the center of the table. I'm coming. Saturday arrived overcast and slightly cool, the kind of mid-autumn morning that couldn't quite decide whether it wanted to commit to the season. Evan was up at 7, which was earlier than necessary, and spent the first 20 minutes of the morning doing nothing useful. Standing at the kitchen window with his coffee, watching the street below where a dog walker was negotiating 3 leashes and a stubborn terrier. He had, in fact, worn the navy shirt. Dara had been right. The shirt was fine. Isabella came out at 8:15 in jeans and a dark green jacket, her hair down for once, and she looked not like the version of her he saw in press photos, not like the woman on the cover of Meridian Business Monthly, but unmistakably herself. The specific self she was in this apartment, in this kitchen, on this floor, real in the way he had been trying to avoid thinking about for months. Ready? He said. You're nervous, she said. I'm not nervous. You've checked your phone 3 times since I walked in. He put his phone in his pocket. Ready? She smiled. Ready? They took his car, which was 7 years old and had a crack in the passenger side mirror he had been meaning to fix since spring. She did not comment on the mirror. She adjusted the seat slightly and found a radio station before he had to ask, because she had been in his car enough times to know he liked having music but always forgot to turn it on. That small, practiced knowledge, the specific fluency of 2 people who had been learning each other without meaning to, sat between them on the drive to Hendricks Park and said more than either of them had put into words. The restaurant had a patio that overlooked a narrow river, the water moving flat and silver under the overcast light. They were seated at a table near the railing. She ordered black coffee. He ordered coffee and orange juice and then second-guessed the orange juice and kept it anyway. For the first few minutes, they looked at the water and didn't force it. Then she said, "Tell me something I don't know about you." He thought about it. I wanted to be an architect. Seriously. Until I was 20. Then I took 1 actual architecture class in college and realized I had no structural sense whatsoever, and that wanting to build things and being able to build things were not the same skill set. That's surprisingly self-aware. The professor was not subtle. He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. What about you? I almost quit, she said. The company, when I was 27. She said it the way she said things she didn't usually say. Flat, as if flatness made it easier. The second year was bad. We were running low on runway. 2 of my best engineers quit in the same week, and I had a meeting with an investor who told me that the company's fundamental concept was sound, but that I personally was too difficult to fund long term. She looked at the river. He didn't say it that way. He said I was challenging and that growth stage companies needed collaborative leadership. That's a specific kind of cowardly. It really is. A brief pause. I called my mother and told her I was thinking about walking away. My mother, who is practical to a degree that borders on clinical, said to wait 60 days before making any irreversible decision. So I waited 60 days. She picked up her coffee. Things were better in 60 days. Not perfect, but better. Good advice. It's the only advice she's ever given me that I've actually used. The corner of her mouth moved. Don't tell her. He laughed. A real one. Unguarded. The kind that came out before he could shape it. And she looked at him when he did it, and for a moment the table and the river and the slightly overcast morning were very quiet and very clear. He thought, there you are. Not as a revelation, more like recognizing something that had been true for a while, in the specific and unhurried way that certain truths announce themselves, not all at once, but as a slow accumulation of Tuesdays, of evenings, of pasta and tiramisu, and juniper trees and phone calls from journalists and daughters asking about tooth fairy policy. He was not yet standing inside it fully. Some part of him was still at the edge, still carrying the old instinct to be careful, to be slow, to not mistake a good morning for a whole life. But he was, for the first time in a very long time, not trying to step back. He was trying to step forward. "This is good," she said, looking at the water. "Yeah," he said. "It is." She reached across the table and straightened the small vase of flowers at the corner. Not yellow tulips, just a generic mix the restaurant provided. And her hand passed close to his before she pulled it back. Neither of them said anything about it, but neither of them moved away. The kiss happened on a Wednesday, not Saturday, not at the restaurant with the river view and the overcast sky and the vase of generic flowers she had straightened with her hand passing close to his. Saturday had been good. Saturday had been, by any reasonable measure, a real date. The kind where the conversation went long and the coffee got cold and neither of them reached for their phones. They had driven home afterward and stood in the hallway outside the apartment door for a moment that lasted slightly longer than necessary, both of them aware of it, neither of them quite sure what to do with it, and then she had unlocked the door and gone in and he had followed, and they had made dinner together like it was an ordinary evening, which it was, and also wasn't. The Wednesday kiss happened in the kitchen, which was apparently where everything of consequence happened in apartment 4C. It was 7:30 in the morning. Cora had been there the night before. It was the Tuesday overnight, and Evan had already done the school drop-off and come back, and he walked into the kitchen to find Isabella reading a printed contract at the counter, holding it up toward the window light with the focused squint she brought to text she found either important or suspicious. She was still in the gray sweatshirt. Her hair was up with the pencil again. He poured his coffee. She said without looking up from the contract, "Cora left Gerald on the couch." He turned around. Gerald the stuffed elephant was indeed on the couch, propped slightly sideways against the armrest in a way that suggested he had been deliberately placed rather than accidentally forgotten. Cora did this sometimes, left things at the apartment as if establishing a claim or a reminder or some 5-year-old version of a bookmark. "She'll call about it," he said. "She already texted me." He looked at her. "She's at school." "She texted me before school. She wanted to make sure Gerald was not alone." He stood there for a second, holding his coffee, looking at this woman reading a contract in morning light and reporting, with complete seriousness, the preschool stuffed elephant welfare concerns of his 5-year-old daughter. Something in his chest did the thing it had been doing with increasing frequency since the Tuesday of the tulips, a kind of low, persistent warmth that he had stopped trying to categorize and had started simply acknowledging. He walked over to the counter. She looked up from the contract. He kissed her. It was not a long kiss, and it was not a complicated one. It was the kind of kiss that happened when two people had been circling something long enough that the circling became more exhausting than the thing itself. Direct, warm, decided. Her free hand came up and held the front of his shirt for a moment, and then she stepped back and looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before. Not surprise exactly, more like someone arriving somewhere they had been trying to get to for a long time and not quite believing they had made it. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." She looked down at the contract and then back up at him. "I need to finish reading this." "Okay." "But," she held his eyes, "we should talk tonight." "Yeah," he said, "we should." She went back to the contract. He took his coffee to the table. Gerald the elephant watched from the couch with the fixed, benign expression of a stuffed animal who had seen things. The talking that night was harder than the kiss. This was the thing no one told you about the moment after the moment. The specific and unglamorous work of two imperfect people trying to figure out what they were actually building and whether they were both ready to build it. The kiss was easy. It was the conversation that required something. They made dinner together, which helped, The shared task of chopping and stirring gave them something to do with their hands, while the real conversation assembled itself. She made rice. He made the chicken thing she had shown him 3 months ago that involved a sauce he had never quite replicated the same way twice. It turned out acceptably this time. She started it. "I need you to know something before this goes further," she said. She was carrying bowls to the table, not looking at him. "About what being with me actually involves." "Okay. Not the company stuff. Not Rennick or journalists or any of that." She set the bowls down and sat. "I mean the day-to-day." She picked up her fork and then put it back down. "I work too much. I know I work too much. I have tried over the years to work less, and what actually happens is that I work the same amount but feel worse about it. I cancel things. I'm difficult to reach sometimes when I'm in the middle of something. I've been told by people who cared about me that I disappear." He sat down across from her. "I've lived with you for 11 months. I know. I've watched you disappear. I know what that looks like." He picked up his fork. "I'm still here." "That's different. That was roommate-level disappearing. How does the level change?" "Because if we're—" She stopped, tried again. "If I'm with you and I disappear into a quarter-inch sprint for 3 weeks, that's not me being a busy roommate anymore. That's me being absent from something I chose." She looked at her bowl. "I've done that to people. I didn't mean to, but I did." He ate a bite, thought about it. "What do you need me to do with that information?" She looked up. "Because I can either take it as a warning," he said, "or I can take it as something you're telling me because you want us to do it differently. Those require different responses." She was quiet for a moment. "The second one," she said. "Definitely the second one." "Then tell me what differently looks like for you." "I don't entirely know." "That's honest." "I know that it needs to involve me actually saying when I'm going under rather than just going under and hoping you can read it." She turned her fork over in her hand. "I'm not good at asking for the room. I'm better at just taking it without announcing it." "Yeah," he nodded. "I've noticed." "Does that—" "It's frustrating sometimes," he said. "I'm not going to lie about that. There were nights in the first few months where you went quiet for 3 days, and I genuinely couldn't tell if I had done something." He set his fork down. "But I also know that's not about me, and I know the difference between someone disappearing because they're done with you and someone disappearing because they're trying to manage something they don't have words for yet." She looked at him with the still face, the honest face. "How do you know that difference?" "Because you always came back." He picked his fork back up. "Every time you came back and made too much pasta and left the light on." Something moved through her expression that she didn't immediately control. She looked away, at the window, and he let her have the moment. When she turned back, her voice was level. "Your turn," she said. "My turn what?" "You know what." He did know. He ate another bite first, buying himself 30 seconds, and then he set the fork down properly and sat back. "I'm going to get scared," he said. "Not constantly, not in a way that should necessarily alarm you. But there are going to be moments where I pull back because something about this feels too good to be real, and when that happens, I need you to not read it as me changing my mind." "How will I know the difference?" "I'll tell you." He said it before he fully decided to say it, and then found it was true. "That's what I'm committing to. Not that I won't get scared, but that I'll tell you when I am." She nodded slowly. "That's workable." "Also," he hesitated, "Cora is... she's not negotiable." "I know that. I need you to know it not just as a fact, but as a reality. There are going to be weekends that are entirely about her. There are going to be events and school things and moments where she has to come first, not because you don't matter, but because she's 5 and she needs consistency." "Evan," her voice was quiet. "I know Cora. I have spent 11 months knowing Cora. She called me before school to check on a stuffed elephant." The real smile, the asymmetric one. "I'm not worried about Cora." He looked at her for a moment. "Okay." "Okay?" she said back. They ate the rest of dinner. It wasn't perfect. There was a stretch in the middle where they were both quieter than comfortable, working through the residue of the things they had said, making sure the ground was still solid. But it held. They did the dishes side by side, and she told him about a meeting she had that afternoon that had gone sideways in a mildly absurd way, involving a miscommunication about time zones. And he told her about a customer at the bookstore who had spent 40 minutes asking for recommendations and then bought a book he had specifically not recommended. And by the time they moved to the couch, the difficult part of the evening had dissolved into the ordinary part. And the ordinary part felt different now, ma'am. Richer, maybe, or just more honest. I'm going to need to tell my team, she said, at some point. She was sideways on the couch, with her feet up, reading something on her phone, and she said it the way she sometimes said things she had been turning over for a while, lightly, like it was a small observation rather than something she had been sitting with. About us? About the arrangement. Someone on my team knows about Kelmore already. Whoever tipped Rennick's contact got the information somewhere, and it's more likely to be a careless word than a deliberate leak. I need to get ahead of it rather than have it surface in a way I can't manage. She lowered the phone. How do you feel about that? About you telling your team you're in a relationship? About the possibility that your name could become associated with mine professionally. In print, potentially. She looked at him carefully. It's not a certainty, but it's a possibility. He thought about this honestly. He was a bookstore manager in Kelmore. His professional world and Isabella Sterling's professional world did not overlap in ways that would make this complicated for him. But there was the personal reality, being named, being known, being the person attached to a name that carried weight in rooms he didn't have any interest in entering. I don't love it, he said. The idea of being written about. That's fair. But I'm not, he tried to find the right word. I'm not going to tell you to hide something because it makes me uncomfortable. That's not how this works. I can control the narrative more than you might think. The legal team is good, and I don't intend to make announcements. She turned the phone over in her hand. I just wanted you to know it was a variable. Noted. He pulled a pillow behind his back. Is there anything else in the variable category I should know about? She appeared to consider this genuinely. Holt Rennick is probably going to be unpleasant about this when he finds out. How unpleasant? He'll make noise at the board level, nothing that threatens anything real. I hold majority shares and the company's last 2 quarters were strong. But he'll make noise because it's what he does when he feels like he doesn't have visibility. She said it evenly, but he could hear underneath it the specific low irritation of someone describing a recurring problem they had accepted but not made peace with. He thinks CEOs should be legible to the people who fund them. I think that's his issue, not mine. We've been disagreeing about this for 2 years. What does he look like? She blinked. What? Describe him. I want to know what he looks like. A beat, and then she laughed. The surprised version, the one that came out before she was ready. He's about 60, very tall, wears the same 3 suits in rotation, has the kind of handshake that's meant to establish something. I hate him already. Most people do within 10 minutes. She settled back. He's not actually dangerous. He's just the kind of person who has been told his instincts are good for so long that he's stopped distinguishing between his instincts and his preferences. Does he know about me specifically or just the roommate situation? Just the situation, I think, for now. She looked at the ceiling. It'll be fine. I've handled Rennick before. He believed her. He had watched her handle things for 11 months. The board calls, the investor negotiations, the operational problems that arrived in her inbox at 10 p.m. and required a decision by morning. And she handled them with the specific, unsentimental competence of someone who had learned early that problems didn't care about your feelings. And so it was better to address them directly than to waste energy on outrage. I'll follow your lead on it, he said. She looked at him sideways. You're being very easy about all of this. I'm choosing my battles. I thought you said you weren't scared. I said I'd tell you when I was scared. I'm not scared. He looked at her steadily. I'm choosing to trust your judgment on your own world. That's different from scared. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said, with a softness that wasn't her usual register. Thank you. Cora was the one who broke the news to Nadia. This was not, technically, anyone's plan. Cora came for her Tuesday overnight the following week, and she was from the moment Evan picked her up at school in an unusually communicative mood, a phase she went through periodically, where everything she had been observing and storing over the previous several days required immediate external processing. She talked without stop from the school pickup to the apartment, a rolling inventory of things that had happened, things she had thought about, things she had questions about, things Gerald had apparently communicated to her via some private channel. At dinner, mid-forkful, she looked across the table at both of them. Evan and Isabella had been eating together, which was normal, which she had always been present for, and said, entirely without preamble, "Are you two in love?" Evan set down his fork. Isabella picked up her water glass. "That's a big word," Evan said carefully. "Ms. Parrish says love is not just big, love is also small," Cora said. She had a very specific way of delivering information she had recently acquired that suggested she was testing whether the adults around her knew it too. Small love is when you do things for someone because you want to, not because you have to. Evan looked at Isabella. Isabella was looking at her water glass with the expression of someone who was very committed to not saying whatever she was thinking. "Where did Miss Parrish say that?" Evan asked. "At morning meeting. We were talking about helping." Cora ate a carrot. "Bella made you coffee this morning." "I make coffee every morning." "You made it before he asked." Cora pointed the carrot at Isabella. "That's small love," Ms. Parrish said. A short silence descended on the table. Isabella very deliberately set down her water glass and looked at Cora with a seriousness that matched the gravity of the inquiry. "Miss Parrish is very smart," she said. "I know." Cora ate the carrot. "So, are you in love?" "We like each other a lot," Evan said. Cora considered this. "That's the same thing," she decided, and went back to her dinner with the air of someone who had received the confirmation they needed and could now move on. Evan looked at Isabella over Cora's head. Isabella looked back. Neither of them said anything, but what passed between them in that moment was its own kind of answer. Not the kind you gave a 5-year-old, not the kind you said out loud at a dinner table on a Tuesday night, but real, nonetheless. The kind that arrived quietly, like the light you had been sitting in so long you had stopped noticing it was there. Later that night, after Cora was asleep and Gerald had been retrieved from the couch and formally tucked in alongside her, Evan came back to the living room to find Isabella sitting in her usual corner of the couch with her laptop, and he sat down next to her. Not at the other end, but next to her, close enough that she could feel him there. And she shifted slightly and rested her head against his shoulder without either of them deciding to do it. He did not think about what it meant. He just let it be what it was. The call from Nadia came 3 days later. Nadia Mercer, Nadia Poole now, she had gone back to her family name after the engagement ended, was not, in the specific accounting of their uncoupling, a villain. She and Evan had managed their way to a functional co-parenting arrangement through about 18 months of careful, sometimes painful work, and the arrangement mostly worked. She was a good mother. She was also a woman who had known Evan for 7 years and who could, when she was paying attention, read him with an accuracy he found intermittently inconvenient. She called on a Friday afternoon. He was at the bookstore in the back room eating lunch. He picked up. "Cora told me something," she said. He set down his sandwich. "What did she say?" "She said you and your roommate are in love, with the small kind." A pause. "She cited her teacher." He closed his eyes briefly. It's new. We're figuring it out." "The billionaire." Not unkind, just factual. "Yes." "Okay." Another pause, and he could hear her deciding something on the other end, measuring it. "Is she good to Cora?" "Yeah, really good." "Are you happy?" He thought about the morning coffee, already made. The shoulder, the couch, the head resting there like it had always been where it belonged. The kitchen, and the tulips, and the tiramisu from Carver Street. "I think I'm getting there," he said. "Good." And she meant it, he thought. She was not a cruel person. They had just been wrong for each other in the specific and quiet way that two people could be wrong. Not dramatically, not with anyone to blame, just wrong. "I just need to know if it becomes relevant to Cora's routine. New people matter." "She already knows her." A short silence. "Right. The roommate." "Yeah." "Okay." He heard her exhale. "Be careful, Evan. Not because of who she is, just..." She stopped. "You went a long time being careful about yourself." Make sure this is real and not just the first warm thing that came along. It landed harder than she probably meant it to. He sat with it for a moment. It's not the first warm thing, he said. She's been beside me for almost a year. I know who she is. Nadia was quiet. Okay, she said finally. That's enough for me. They hung up. He sat in the back room of the bookstore for a few minutes, looking at his sandwich, thinking about what she had said, the careful version of it, the way she had been measured and fair, even when she didn't have to be. He thought about how strange it was, the shape of a life, how the person who had known him best could also be the person who knew, better than anyone, that he had been running on half power for 2 years, and how the recognition that he had stopped running on half power arrived not with a trumpet, but with a quiet Friday phone call in a back room. He picked up his sandwich. He texted Isabella. Nadia called. Cora ratted us out. All fine. The reply came back in 40 seconds. I knew Gerald was a liability. He laughed in the empty back room, genuinely, the kind that caught him off guard. Sam. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew yet, was that Holt Rennick had not been idle. While Evan was navigating Friday phone calls and Tuesday dinners, and the ongoing saga of the juniper tree, which had by now fully recovered and had even developed what Isabella described as new growth, with an investment in the outcome that he found quietly endearing. Rennick had been working a different angle. He had not gone back to the journalist. That avenue had closed, and he was smart enough not to push a door that had been shut by lawyers. What he had done instead was subtler. He had begun, in the way powerful people who operated at the board level operated, to build a narrative. Privately, selectively, in the conversations that happened before and after formal meetings, in the lateral exchanges with the 2 other board members who historically deferred to his read on things. The narrative was simple and, for that reason, difficult to argue against directly. Isabella Sterling's recent choices, the apartment, the roommate, the deliberate distance from the company's public profile, suggested a CEO who was losing focus, who was perhaps more interested in personal life than in the fiduciary responsibilities of her position. None of this had surfaced yet. It was assembling. The way storms assembled, pressure changes you could feel before you could see. The first sign came not from Rennick directly, but from Mara Holt, no relation, who was Stellarwell's VP of Communications and who had been with the company for 4 years and whom Isabella trusted without reservation. Mara sent a message on a Thursday night. Can we talk tomorrow? Not email. Something you should know. Isabella saw it at 11 p.m. sitting in bed with her laptop and felt the specific kind of cold awareness that came from reading between lines she had learned to read. She sent back 8 a.m. She put the laptop down. Lay in the dark. The apartment was quiet. Evan was asleep. She could hear the specific quality of quiet that meant his light was off. The juniper was on the windowsill of the living room, doing its slow, steady recovering thing. She thought about what she had, assembled from all the pieces. The apartment, the Saturday with the river view, the Wednesday morning kiss, the couch, the shoulder, the Tuesday dinners, Cora and Gerald, and small love and Ms. Parrish's morning meeting. She thought about what she was willing to protect it, and she thought about the answer, which arrived not as a calculation, but as something closer to a fact. Everything. She was willing to use everything she had. Whatever Rennick was building, she would be ready for it. She closed her eyes. Outside, the city moved through its late-night mechanics. The juniper held its angle on the windowsill, green and recovering, doing the patient work of growing back toward something. Mara Holt arrived at the apartment at 8 in the morning carrying 2 coffees from the place on Carver Street and the specific expression of someone who had rehearsed what they were about to say and was no longer certain the rehearsal was adequate. Isabella had told Evan the night before that she had a work call coming in early. She had not elaborated, which he had understood meant the elaborating would come later, after she knew what she was dealing with. He had been up when Mara arrived, dressed and heading out for an early Saturday shift at the bookstore, and he had nodded at Mara. They had met twice before, briefly, and said good morning and taken his jacket from the hook by the door with the particular tact of a man who understood when a room needed to be vacated. At the door he had paused and looked back at Isabella. Just a look. She had given him a slight nod back. I'm okay, go. And he had gone. Mara set the coffees on the kitchen table and sat down. She was 40, direct, with the kind of calm that came from having been in enough communications crises that she had long since stopped wasting energy on panic. The calm did not mean the news was good. Rennick has been talking to Caldwell and Price, she said, for at least the last 3 weeks. Caldwell and Price were the two board members who historically aligned with Rennick when he pushed for something. Not out of conviction, usually, more out of the path of least resistance logic that made certain people predictable. Isabella had accounted for them in her mental model of the board for years. "What's he been saying?" Isabella said. "The framing is focus. He's been suggesting that you've been disengaged from the company's strategic positioning heading into Q1. That the lifestyle choices," Mara said the phrase with a flat distaste that mirrored Isabella's own, "suggest a CEO who is coasting on a strong balance sheet rather than actively driving the next phase of growth. That's not a factual claim. That's an impression. That's why it's effective." Mara wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. "He's not going to call a formal vote. He doesn't have the votes for a formal motion, and he knows it. What he's doing is softer than that. He's building a record of concern, so that if anything goes wrong in the next 2 quarters, a missed target, a bad press cycle, anything, he has a documented history of having raised the issue." Isabella absorbed this. She looked at the table, at her coffee, at the window where the juniper was catching the morning light in its slow, steady recovery. "He's building cover," she said. "Yes. For an argument he can't make yet." "That's my read." She was quiet for a moment. This was the part of her professional life that she had never made peace with. Not the work itself, which she genuinely loved with a consistency that still surprised her, but this, the boardroom politics, the lateral maneuvering, the people who built their relevance by identifying threats to other people's credibility. She had tolerated Rennick for years because he was not wrong about everything, and because majority shares did not mean she could afford to make enemies without purpose. But tolerance had a floor. "What does he actually want?" she said. Mara looked at her steadily. "I think he wants you visible. He wants you at events, in the press, doing the profile management things you've been avoiding. He wants a CEO who looks like his idea of a CEO. And if I don't, then he continues building the record and waits." Isabella sat with this. Outside, Kelmore Avenue was beginning its Saturday morning, the sound of it rising slowly. Traffic, a delivery truck, the distant specific sound of someone's dog losing an argument with a squirrel. Ordinary city noise, the noise of a life that looked nothing like the life Rennick thought she should be living. "There's something else," Mara said. Isabella looked at her. "He knows about Evan." Mara said it carefully, the way you said things you knew would land hard and wanted to cushion without minimizing. "Not just the roommate. He knows there's been a development. I don't know who told him or how much detail he has, but he raised it with Caldwell. He framed it as a potential distraction, a relationship with an unknown private individual that could become a media liability." The room was very quiet. Isabella said, "He raised it to Caldwell." "Yes. By name. By description. I don't know if he had the name." Mara leaned forward slightly. "Isabella, I need you to understand what I'm telling you. He's not going to attack the relationship directly. That would be a losing argument, and he's too smart for it. What he's going to do is use it as evidence in the focus narrative. Every time something comes up that he can attach to distraction, he will." Isabella looked at her coffee. Thought about Evan's face this morning. The look at the door, the slight nod, the way he had read the room and made himself scarce without being asked. Thought about the kitchen table and the tiramisu and the Wednesday kiss and a 5-year-old declaring small love over a dinner involving carrots. Thought about the lease renewal that was still 3 months out, but already present in the back of her mind like a door she was walking toward. She thought about what Nadia had said to Evan. The version Evan had told her afterward, quietly, without drama. Make sure this is real and not just the first warm thing that came along. She thought about her answer, which had not changed since she lay in the dark 3 nights ago and looked for it. "Okay," she said. Mara blinked. "Okay. I'm not ending the relationship. I want to be clear about that before we talk strategy." She looked up. "That's not a variable." Mara was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in her expression. Not professional recalibration, but something more human than that, a thing she didn't let show very often. Good, she said simply. What I will do, Isabella continued, is give him less to work with everywhere else, which means I need to think about Q1 positioning and where I've been genuinely absent. She sat back. Set me up a call with the strategy team for Monday, and I want to see the last 6 months of board communications archived, everything Rennick has touched. I want to understand the record he thinks he's building. I can have that to you by end of day. One more thing. She picked up her coffee. Find out how he knows about Evan. Whoever's been talking to him, I need to know who's in that chain. She didn't tell Evan all of it. This was a decision she made consciously, which meant she also knew it was not entirely the right decision, but she made it anyway because she had not yet figured out how to hand someone a problem she was still in the middle of solving without making them feel like the cause of it. She told him the broad outline. Rennick was making noise at the board level. She was getting ahead of it. It was manageable. She did not tell him that his name had been raised, that he had been described as a potential liability, that a man she had tolerated for years had apparently decided that the person she was choosing to love was a board-level discussion item. She told herself she would tell him once she had handled it. Evan, for his part, understood that she was telling him an edited version. He understood this because he knew her well enough by now to read the shape of what she was leaving out. The way she was slightly more clipped than usual when she described the situation, the way she looked at the table rather than at him when she said it's manageable, the way the word manageable was doing more work than it should have to. He did not push it. He pushed it 3 days later. It was a Tuesday, Cora's overnight. After Cora was asleep, they were in the kitchen. Him washing the dishes from dinner, her at the table with her laptop doing the thing where she was technically working but was actually processing something loudly enough that it was present in the room. And he turned off the water and turned around and said, "What are you not telling me?" She looked up. "About Rennick," he said. "There's more than you said." She held his eyes for a moment, then she closed the laptop. "He raised you to one of the board members," she said, "by description, as a potential distraction." Evan was quiet. "I didn't tell you, because I didn't want you to feel responsible for something that is entirely about Rennick's need to manage things he has no standing to manage." She was looking at him steadily. "But you asked, so. You should have told me. I know. Not because I need to fix it, just—" He set the dish towel down. "You don't have to protect me from things. We talked about this. We said we'd say the thing." "I know." A pause. "I'm sorry." He leaned against the counter. "What does he actually want?" "He wants me to be a different kind of CEO, more visible, more conventional." She said it without heat now, just factually. "He's been wanting this for 2 years. He doesn't like what he can't see clearly." "And is it going to be a real problem? Not the edited version, the real one?" She met his eyes. "Possibly. If Q1 numbers slip at all, he'll have more ground to stand on. The board as a whole supports me, but Caldwell and Price are persuadable if the argument sounds reasonable enough, and Rennick has been working on reasonable sounding." She folded her hands on the table. "I've dealt with worse. I know what I'm doing." "I believe you." He came to the table and sat down across from her. "I just need to know the real version so I can be in it with you, not standing outside it being managed." She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her processing the thing she always processed when someone offered to be alongside her rather than in front of or behind her. The specific and ingrained difficulty she had with accepting that kind of presence without immediately trying to minimize the cost of it. "It's going to require some things from me that might affect us," she said carefully. "Time. There will be a period where I have to be more visible, more available to the board's expectations. Events, press, the things I've been—" She stopped. "Avoiding is the honest word. Okay? It won't be forever. But it's going to be a stretch of weeks where I'm not the apartment version of myself very much. Will you tell me when it's happening, rather than just going under?" She remembered their dinner conversation from weeks ago, the commitment she had made. "Yes," she said. "I'll tell you." "Then it's fine." He said it simply. "It's not nothing, but it's fine." She let out a breath she had apparently been holding. "You're being very calm about this." "I'm scared," he said. I told you I'd tell you when I was. I'm a little scared right now. She went still. Not of losing you, he said. Or not only that, but of... He looked at the table. I've been in something before where external pressure was the thing that slowly changed the temperature, where it didn't feel like anything was wrong until it did, and He looked up. I noticed the pressure. This isn't the same, she said. Her voice was careful. I know. Rennick doesn't get to decide what I do with my personal life. He doesn't have that power, and I'm not going to give it to him. She held his eyes with the specific directness she brought to things she meant without qualification. I want to be clear about that. I know, he said again. I'm not asking you to prove it. I'm just telling you I'm scared so you don't misread it when I go quiet. She nodded, reached across the table and put her hand flat next to his. Not on top of it, just next to it, close enough to feel the warmth. Don't go quiet, she said. I'll be here. He turned his hand over and she put hers in it, and they stayed like that for a moment, two people at a kitchen table being honest about the size of the thing they were carrying, which was the only way to carry it without putting it down. Mara called on Thursday with the answer to the last question Isabella had asked. The name was Felix Greer. Junior analyst on the operations team, 18 months at the company, had been at a team dinner in September where Isabella had mentioned, offhand, that she was thinking about renewing the Kelmore lease. He had mentioned this to a colleague. The colleague had mentioned it in the context of a casual conversation with someone in Rennick's network. It was not malicious on Felix Greer's part. It was the accidental and careless chain of small disclosures that moved information in every organization, the way words traveled through walls without anyone intending them to. Isabella listened to this and said, Does Felix Greer know he's part of this chain? No, Mara said. Then leave it. There's nothing to correct there. She was standing at the window of her home office, looking at the street. Rennick built on someone else's carelessness. That's not new behavior. What do you want to do about Rennick directly? I'm going to talk to him. A pause. Directly. Directly. She watched a pigeon land on the building across the street and immediately leave again, apparently dissatisfied with the quality of the ledge. Set it up for next week, in person, at the offices. I want him in a room, not on a call. Isabella. Mara's voice carried a particular inflection, not a warning exactly, but adjacent to one. Don't let him make it personal. He already made it personal, she said. I'm just going to address it professionally. The meeting with Rennick was set for the following Wednesday. She told Evan she was meeting with Rennick. She told him Tuesday night when Cora was there, after dinner, in the specific quiet that descended when Cora was asleep, and the apartment held the particular stillness of a place where a small person had recently been making a great deal of noise. They were on the couch. She had her feet up. He was reading something. They had reached the point in their coexistence where silence was not something that required filling. Tomorrow, she said. He set the book down. How are you feeling about it? Like I know what I'm doing. A short pause. And also, like I wish I didn't have to. What's the goal? Going in? She thought about it. I want him to understand clearly that his board position is not a license to have opinions about my relationship. And I want to do it in a way that doesn't give him anything to take back to Caldwell and Price. She turned the hem of her sweatshirt over in her hands. So it has to be professional and direct without being aggressive, which is harder than aggressive. You're good at that. I'm better at it than I used to be. She looked at the ceiling. When I was 26, I would have walked in there and said exactly what I thought in exactly the way I thought it, and felt great about myself for 12 hours, and then watched him use every word against me. What changed? Experience. She said it plainly. And someone pointing out to me once that the goal of a difficult conversation isn't to feel good about how you handled it. It's to get what you actually need from it. He nodded. What do you actually need from it? For him to back down quietly, not because he's been beaten, because he's understood that the ground he's standing on is less solid than he thought. She shifted position. I'm not trying to humiliate him. I'm just trying to make the noise stop. Okay. He picked the book back up. and she understood that this was his way of saying, I trust you, go in, come back, I'll be here. Not indifference, the opposite. She looked at the side of his face for a moment. The concentration he brought to reading, the slight tension in his jaw that was just how his face worked in repose, the person who was sitting next to her on the couch because he had chosen to be here and kept choosing it, and felt, underneath the Tuesday night quiet, something that was not quite calm and not quite fear. Something that sat between them, the specific weight of mattering to someone, which was different from being needed and different from being wanted and different from being loved in the abstract. It was the weight of being real to a person. She had not felt it in a long time. She looked back at the ceiling. Let the weight be there. Didn't try to manage it. The meeting with Rennick lasted 43 minutes. He had the corner office at Stellarwell's headquarters downtown. He used it 2 days a week by arrangement because managing partner status came with certain prerogatives, one of which was the appearance of authority that a corner office provided. Isabella had the actual corner office on the floor above it, which she was in perhaps 60% of the time, and she had walked past Rennick's door for 2 years without particular incident, and she walked past it now and kept going to the conference room she had booked specifically because it was neutral ground. He came in 2 minutes late, which was not accidental. He was exactly as she had described him to Evan, tall, one of the 3 suits, a handshake that introduced itself before he did. Isabella. He sat. Good to sit down. Holt. She had a folder in front of her that she did not open. It was there to signal that she had things documented. I'll be direct. I'd expect nothing less. I know you've been talking to Caldwell and Price about focus and distraction. I know that my personal life has been part of that conversation. She kept her voice even, not warm, not aggressive, the register of someone who had done the math and was delivering the result. I want to address it once clearly, so we don't spend the next quarter having a version of this conversation sideways. He leaned back slightly, the expression of a man who had been in enough rooms to know when someone was about to say something he needed to respond to carefully. I've raised legitimate governance concerns. You raised my relationship status in a board-level conversation, she said. Let's be accurate about what happened. A beat. The framing was about focus. The content was about who I live with and who I'm seeing. She looked at him steadily. I want you to hear this clearly. My personal life is not a governance matter. It is not a fiduciary matter. It does not appear in my employment terms. You don't have standing to make it a board conversation, and if it continues to appear in your conversations with Caldwell and Price, I will raise a formal concern about the boundary of your managing partner role. She paused. Not because I want that conflict, but because I will have it rather than let this continue. The room was quiet. Rennick looked at her with the expression of a man recalculating. Beyond that, she continued, the focus narrative has no factual basis. I have the last 6 months of deliverables, board communications, and operational outcomes here if you want to walk through them. Q2 and Q3 numbers speak for themselves. She touched the folder. Is there something substantive you want to put on the table about the company's actual direction? He was quiet for a long moment. She let the silence run because she had learned, experience, like she told Evan, that silence was its own kind of pressure and that some people, when confronted with its weight, said things they had not intended. The Q1 positioning, he said finally. I have concerns about the enterprise segment. Then let's talk about the enterprise segment. She opened the folder. They spent 35 minutes on the enterprise segment. It was a real conversation, not comfortable, not friendly, but real. The kind of exchange that happened when 2 people who were genuinely not aligned on strategy had to negotiate something they were both responsible for. She had things he didn't, including information from the strategy team, calls she had set up specifically for this. He had, she acknowledged to herself, one legitimate point about a partnership evaluation that her team had not moved on quickly enough. When they finished, she closed the folder. Are we aligned on the other matter? She said. He looked at her. The recalculation in his expression had resolved into something she had seen on his face before. Not respect exactly, more the specific neutrality of a man who had decided this was not a fight worth having because the ground had shifted. We're aligned, he said. She stood. extended her hand. He shook it. She walked out of the conference room and down the hall and into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby and stood there while the elevator descended. And when the doors opened, she walked through the lobby and out onto the street and stood on the pavement in the October afternoon and breathed. Her phone buzzed. A text from Evan. How'd it go? She stood there on the pavement outside her company's building, the city running its ordinary noise around her, and typed back, "Done." He had one legitimate point about Enterprise. Everything else is handled. The reply was immediate. "Come home. I'll make the chicken thing." She looked at the text for a moment, the specific simplicity of it. Come home, like it was a place she had been heading toward all day and he was just confirming the direction. She put her phone in her pocket and started walking toward the parking structure. The chicken thing turned out better than his previous attempts. He had made some kind of adjustment to the sauce. Less of one thing, more of something else, or maybe a different timing, she couldn't tell. And it was closer to the version she had made when she first showed him, the version that had prompted Cora, on first tasting it 3 months ago, to declare it the second best thing she had ever eaten after cereal. "What did you do differently?" Isabella said. "I didn't panic about the timing." He topped off her water without being asked. "I just let it do the thing." She ate another bite. "That's the first cooking advice I've ever heard that was actually useful." "Dara told me. She's been teaching me things." "Dara is teaching you to cook." "She started because I told her I kept messing up the sauce, and she said the problem was I was treating it like a task that needed to be completed rather than a process that needed time." He sat back. "She meant it about the sauce. I think she also meant it about other things." Isabella looked at him across the table. "Other things like?" He met her eyes. "The last 2 years." She was quiet. "I've been very good at recovery mode," he said. "I know how to rebuild after something goes wrong. I know how to assess damage and make a plan and execute it and get to a place that's better than where I started." He picked up his fork. "I'm less good at just being in something that's going well, letting it do its thing without panicking about the timing." She said nothing. She waited the way she had learned to wait with him, fully, without filling the space. "I'm trying to do that differently now," he said. "With this." He gestured slightly, meaning the table, the apartment, her. "I don't want to treat it like a task I have to manage correctly. I want to just—" He shook his head because the word he wanted was not coming. "Be in it." She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the evening was settling into the particular quiet of a Thursday in Kelmore, the city winding down, the street below losing its afternoon energy. The juniper on the windowsill had, at some point in the last week, developed a fourth green branch that had not been there before. "Okay," she said softly. "Then be in it." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a resolution. It was just two people at a table, deciding again the way you had to keep deciding. Not once, not in a grand moment, but in the small ongoing accumulation of choosing each other over the easier alternative. He ate his chicken. She ate hers. The evening moved around them, ordinary and quiet and entirely, specifically theirs. Pa. The lease renewal arrived on a Friday in November, slipped under the door sometime between 7 and 8 in the morning, while both of them were still inside. Evan found it when he went to get the paper, a habit he had maintained since moving in, one of those small analog rituals that felt increasingly eccentric in a world that had moved on from them, and which he kept anyway, because some things you did not give up just because they had become impractical. He picked up the envelope and turned it over and read the return address and stood in the hallway for a moment, just holding it. He brought it to the kitchen and set it on the table without opening it. Isabella was at the counter with her tea, reading something on her laptop, and she looked at the envelope and then at him. Neither of them said anything immediately. The envelope sat between them the way certain objects do when their meaning exceeds their physical weight. Ordinary paper, ordinary printing, a document asking a question both of them had been walking toward for weeks. "Came early," she said finally. "Month before the end of term." He sat down. "They're efficient." She looked at it. "Do you want to open it?" "You can." She came to the table and sat down and picked it up and opened it with the clean efficiency she brought to everything that arrived in an envelope. No hesitation, no ceremony, just the practical removal of what was inside. She unfolded the paper and read it, and then set it flat on the table between them. It was a standard renewal, 12-month term. A modest increase in the monthly rate that fell within what both of them had expected. 2 signature lines at the bottom, the way renewals worked in this building when there were 2 tenants side by side on the document, like a small civic fact about who lived here and who had decided to keep living here. Evan looked at it for a long moment. He thought about the Tuesday he had come home with yellow tulips for a woman who wasn't coming. He thought about the kitchen that night, the pasta, the tiramisu from Carver Street, the 5 words that had quietly reorganized the next several months of his life. He thought about Saturdays and the river and the overcast sky and the juniper and Cora and Gerald and Nadia's phone call and Rennick and 43 minutes in a conference room and the chicken thing and the couch and the shoulder and the particular quality of silence that existed in this apartment when everything was okay. He thought about what it meant to not treat something good like a task that needed to be completed, to let it do its thing without panicking about the timing. "I want to stay," he said. Isabella was looking at the document. She did not look up immediately, and he understood that she was doing what she always did when something mattered, taking it seriously, not filling it with noise, giving the moment the weight it deserved. "I want to stay too," she said. They looked at each other. It was not a grand moment. The kitchen light was ordinary morning light. She was still in pajamas. He was in yesterday's shirt. The juniper on the windowsill was doing its quiet 4th branch thing. Outside, Kelmore was beginning its Friday, the sounds of it unremarkable and familiar. "There's something I want to say first," she said. She folded her hands on the table. "Before we sign it." "Okay. I know what this is." She looked at him steadily. "Not just a lease. I know what it means. I don't want to sign it and have either of us pretend we don't know what it means." "I know what it means." "Tell me." He held her eyes. "It means we're choosing this. Not by default because we already live here, not because moving is inconvenient. Deliberately." He put his hand flat on the table, a gesture he didn't plan. "It means I want the next 12 months to look like the last 3 have looked, including the hard parts." She was quiet for a moment. "The hard parts," she said, "the Rennick thing, the conversation about disappearing, the scared Tuesday." He paused. "All of it, not just the good weeks." Something moved through her face that was not entirely controlled, which was the version of her he trusted most. The version where she hadn't gotten to the management layer yet, and what you saw was what was actually there. "Okay," she said. Her voice was slightly different than usual, lower. "Yeah. Me too." He slid the document toward himself and picked up a pen from the cup on the table. A regular ballpoint, slightly out of ink, the kind that worked fine if you pressed, and signed his name on the left line. He pushed it back. She picked up the pen. She pressed it to the paper and signed underneath his name, as she always did, as she had always done in the small daily mechanics of their shared life. Not above, not beside, but beneath, in the particular way 2 people arranged themselves in a shared space when they had stopped pretending the arrangement was purely practical. She set the pen down. They sat with it for a moment, the document between them, signed, ordinary, binding. Then she stood up and went back to the counter and her tea and her laptop, because it was a Friday and she had a 9 o'clock, and the moment was not less real for being brief. He folded the document back into the envelope and put it on the small pile of things by the door that needed to be returned to the building manager. He poured his coffee. She said without looking up from her laptop, "Cora's coming tomorrow." "Yeah. I thought we could do the pancake thing and then that park on Hadley Street she wanted to go back to. She's going to want to bring Gerald. Gerald is welcome at the park on Hadley Street." She turned a page. "I'll make extra pancakes." He stood at the counter with his coffee and looked at the side of her face. The laptop glow, the pencil in her hair, the slight downward set of her mouth that meant she was reading something that required attention, and thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that the things we miss in plain sight are almost never the dramatic ones. They are the unremarkable ones, the ones too ordinary to flag, the ones right there. Q1 did not slip. This was the result of approximately 8 weeks of work that Isabella did largely in the compact early morning hours before the apartment woke up. The 5 a.m. calls, the strategy revisions, the enterprise segment initiative that Rennick had flagged, and that she had, to her own moderate annoyance, acknowledged was a legitimate concern and acted on. She had brought on a new partnership lead for the enterprise division by mid-November, had been present at 4 major industry events in 2 months, had done 2 press interviews she had found tedious but necessary, and had delivered a Q4 board presentation that Caldwell had described as the most thorough he'd seen in 2 years. Rennick had sat through the presentation without saying much. He had asked 2 questions, both substantive, both addressed. He had said good work at the end in the tone of a man who was recalibrating the terms of a conflict he had decided was no longer worth the cost. Mara had sent her a text afterward that contained only 3 words. Corner pocket, done. Isabella had shown Evan the text. He had not known the billiards reference, but had read her expression and understood the meaning. Done, he said. Done, she confirmed. It was not a complete victory in the traditional sense. Rennick was still on the board, would continue to be on the board, would likely continue to be the kind of person who built records of concern and raised narrative-level objections to things he wanted managed. But he had been answered. The ground he had been testing had been demonstrated to be more solid than he expected, and he had, in the way of pragmatic men who chose their battles by probability, moved back from it. The apartment had weathered the stretch Isabella had warned about. There had been a 2-week period in November where she was genuinely difficult to reach. Present in the apartment, but not present in the room, her mind consistently in the other place where the work was happening. Evan had navigated it the way they had agreed. He had told her when it was affecting him, once, directly and without drama, and she had heard it and had come back from wherever she had gone with more visible effort. Not perfectly, but visibly. There had been one evening where it had not worked, where the effort had not been enough, and he had gone to bed before she surfaced from her office, and they had both known in the morning that something needed to be said. She had said it first. I went under again last night. He had said, I know. And then they had sat at the kitchen table and talked about it for 20 minutes and then made breakfast, and that had been, by any honest accounting, enough. Not perfect, just enough, which, Evan had come to understand, was actually what functioning looked like in practice. Dara had asked him about it during a quiet afternoon at the bookstore, in the specific way she had of asking things, sideways, while doing something else, as if the casualness of the delivery reduced the weight of the question. Still good? Still good, he said. No asterisks? Some asterisks. He restocked a shelf. All manageable. Dara had looked at him for a moment with the expression she wore when she was deciding whether to push something. She makes you easier to be around, she said finally. Not in a way you can necessarily see, but the rest of us can. He had not known what to say to this, so he had said nothing, and she had gone back to whatever she was doing and the conversation had closed, but it stayed with him in the way that things stayed when they confirmed something you had been quietly believing without adequate evidence. Cora was the one who noticed the juniper. On a December Saturday, the 3 of them at the apartment, Cora had climbed onto the kitchen counter, a behavior that was technically discouraged and consistently attempted, to reach something on the second shelf, and in doing so had come face to face with the juniper on the windowsill at approximately eye level. She had looked at it for a long moment. It got bigger, she said. Evan had looked up from the table. Yeah, it's been growing. Bella almost killed it. Cora, she did, Isabella said from the other side of the counter. She's accurate. Cora studied the juniper with the focused interest she brought to things she found genuinely puzzling. How did you fix it? Paid more attention, Isabella said. She was standing next to Cora now, looking at the tree, and stopped panicking about whether it was doing the right thing and just let it do what it needed to do. Cora absorbed this. She reached out and touched one of the green branches with 2 fingers, carefully, the way she touched things she had been told were fragile and therefore considered important. It looks okay now, she said. It is, Isabella said. It took a while. Cora looked at Isabella, then at Evan, then back at the juniper. The 5-year-old logic was assembling something. He could tell. The pieces going in, the connections being made in whatever wordless, unarguable way she processed the world. She climbed down from the counter and went back to the living room where Gerald was waiting, and the morning resumed its ordinary Saturday shape, But Evan stayed at the table for a moment and looked at the juniper and at Isabella standing next to it, both of them seeming slightly amused, and thought about the word attention. Paying attention. Not panicking. Letting it do what it needed to do. He had spent 2 years treating his own life like a recovery project, cataloging the damage, making plans, executing them, getting to a place that was better than where he started. He had been good at it. He had built something functional and careful, and in many ways admirable. He had been a good father and a reliable friend and a decent manager and a person his neighbors trusted and his coworkers respected. But he had not been in it, not fully. He had been managing it, which was different, a distinction he had not understood until recently, until someone had said, "Be in it at a kitchen table on a Thursday evening," and he had understood, in the specific way you understood things that had been true for a while before you had the words for them, that being careful and being present were not the same thing. You could be very careful about a life and never really live inside it. He had been outside it for 2 years, standing at the window, observing, keeping himself at the manageable distance. He was inside it now. The messiness of it, the uncertainty of it, the Tuesday mornings where it was slightly awkward and the Wednesday mornings where it wasn't, the conversations that were hard and the ones that were easy and the ones that were both in the same 20 minutes. The phone calls from ex-fiancés and journalists and board members who had opinions about things they had no business having opinions about. The stuffed elephant and the tooth fairy policy and the 5 a.m. calls and the nearly dead juniper that had decided, slowly and stubbornly, to come back. Inside it. That was the difference. Chatsao. The dancing happened on a night in January. It was not planned. Nothing that actually mattered was ever planned in Evan's experience. The things that stuck in the memory were always the accidental ones. The Tuesday nights and the Wednesday mornings, the tiramisu from Carver Street, the lease document signed with a slightly out-of-ink ballpoint pen. It was a Sunday. Cora had been there for the weekend and Evan had just gotten back from dropping her at Nadia's. The specific low quiet that always followed the drop-off, the apartment going from its Cora volume back to its regular volume, which was different enough to feel like a temperature change. He had come back in to find Isabella in the kitchen with the radio on. An actual radio, the old one she kept on the counter that could sometimes receive a decent signal and sometimes couldn't, playing something old and recognizable that he couldn't immediately name. She was doing the dishes, which was normally his job, and she was doing them in the unself-conscious way she moved through the apartment when she thought she was alone. Slightly swaying, not quite dancing, her shoulders moving with the music in the half-committed way of a person who had decided the kitchen was a private space. He stood in the doorway. She turned and saw him and did not stop swaying, which was a different thing from what she usually did, which was to stop and become the other version of herself. She just looked at him with the real smile, the asymmetric one, the one that arrived before she decided, and said, "How was the drop-off?" She cried when she found out Gerald has to stay at Nadia's this week. Gerald is going through a lot. Gerald is a deeply stressed elephant. He came into the kitchen. The song was something mid-century, something with a piano and a horn that felt like a Sunday evening in exactly the right way. "I don't know this song." "It's old." She handed him the last dish to dry. "My mother used to play it." He dried the dish and put it in the cabinet and then did not move away from where he was standing, which was close to her, close enough that the distance was either nothing or everything depending on what happened next. "Dance with me," he said. She looked at him. "In the kitchen." "We're already in the kitchen." She looked at the floor. The practical linoleum, the existing small rug near the sink, the general lack of anything that looked like a dance floor. Then she looked at him. "I'm not a good dancer." "Neither am I." "You're saying that to make me feel better." "I'm saying it because the last time I danced at a wedding, I stepped on someone's foot hard enough that she remembered it at the reception." He held out his hand. "Kitchen dancing has a lower standard." She looked at his hand. Then she took it. They were not good dancers. This was the truth of it. They were two people in a kitchen on a Sunday night moving to an old song on a radio with a sometimes unreliable signal, both of them slightly clumsy, neither of them entirely sure where to put their feet, and the dancing was accordingly imperfect and accordingly real. She stepped on his foot once. He stepped on hers. She laughed, the surprised version again. the one that came out before she was ready, and he laughed, and they kept going because stopping felt like the wrong choice. At some point, the clumsy part settled into something else, not graceful, just closer. Her head against his shoulder, his hand at her back, the song doing its Sunday evening thing on the radio, the kitchen around them with all its accumulated ordinariness, the slightly out-of-ink pen in the cup on the table, the juniper on the windowsill in its fourth branch phase, the fridge with the diagram still on the inside door that neither of them had ever taken down. He thought about the tulips. He thought about them because he could finally think about them without the sting of that Tuesday. The ironed shirt, the empty chair, the phone buzzing on the table. He could think about them now as the accidental catalyst they had been, the thing that had sent him home with his pride on the floor of an alderman's restaurant and brought him back to this apartment, to this kitchen, to the person who had been here the whole time. He thought about how close he had come to not seeing it, how many more Tuesdays he might have spent carefully not looking directly at the thing that was right there. He thought about all the ways you could miss something that wasn't hiding. "Can I tell you something?" he said. I was thinking about this wrong." She lifted her head slightly. "About what?" "About finding someone. About what I was looking for." He kept moving. They were still, technically, dancing, even as the song had shifted into something slower. I had this picture in my head of how it was supposed to look. The right occasion, the right circumstances, the right version of readiness. He paused. And I was so focused on looking for that picture that I couldn't see what was actually there. She was quiet, listening in the full way she listened. "You were right here," he said. "You'd been here for almost a year, and I had filed it very carefully in the category of things I wasn't going to think about." He felt her exhale slightly against his shoulder. I wasted some time. I'm sorry for that." "You weren't ready," she said. "That's generous." "It's accurate." She lifted her head enough to look at him. "I wasn't ready either, not in the way that mattered. I knew what I felt, but feeling something and being ready to do something about it are different things." She held his eyes. "I spent 4 months knowing and not saying. We both took a while." "We did." "We got here," she said simply. He looked at her, this woman who had shown him, over the course of one ordinary year, what it looked like to be real with someone. Not the curated version. Not the version that appeared on business publications and in boardrooms and at investor dinners. The one with the sweatshirt and the pencil and the fridge diagram and the juniper and the strong feelings about Parmesan and the competitive talking and the second place at nationals and the 4 months of quietly knowing something and waiting for the right time to say it. The one who made too much food and left the light on and sat on the floor when things went wrong and got up and kept going and did not apologize for being difficult sometimes. The actual person, imperfect in the specific ways that made her real. "Yeah," he said, "we got here." The radio crackled slightly, the signal doing its intermittent thing, and then steadied, and they stayed where they were because neither of them was ready to stop yet, and the apartment held them the way it had always held them, quietly and without ceremony, the way that places do when they have become, without anyone officially deciding it, a home. There is something nobody tells you about the kind of love that arrives quietly. They tell you about the dramatic kind, the lightning strike version, the one that shows up at the right moment in the right setting with the right music. That version has its own appeal. There is something clean about it, something legible. You can point to the moment and say, that was when everything changed. The quiet version doesn't give you that. It gives you instead a long sequence of Tuesdays. It gives you pasta and a nearly dead plant and a 5-year-old who asks questions you don't have clean answers to. It gives you the conversation where you say the hard thing, and the conversation where you don't say enough, and the morning after both, where you try again. It gives you the awkwardness and the ordinary, and the long stretches where nothing is cinematic, and everything is just life happening. And then at some point you look up and realize that you have been, for a while now, somewhere you did not arrive at dramatically. You arrived at it by staying. This is the thing Evan understood eventually in the specific and unglamorous way that real understanding came to him, not all at once, but like a slow accumulation of evidence. That he had spent 2 years treating love like a destination he needed to find. And the entire time it had been a practice, a daily choosing. The decision, made again and again in small and unremarkable ways, to see the person next to you, to actually look, to stop managing the distance and step across it. He had been good at distance. It had felt for a long time like wisdom. He had called it being careful, being realistic, not making the same mistakes twice. And some of it was that. But some of it, the honest part, the part he had to sit with, was fear wearing the clothes of wisdom. The fear of standing in something good and finding out it wasn't real. The fear of being wrong about someone again. The fear, underneath all the other fears, of finding something worth losing. Isabella had, at 30 years old, built something remarkable from $60,000 and a specific, infuriating certainty. She had sat in rooms full of people who doubted her and delivered. She had managed boards and crises and the specific, exhausting work of being a woman in her industry who refused to perform the version of herself that other people found more comfortable. She had done all of this and come home to an apartment in Kelmore and made too much pasta and left the light on. She was not soft. She was not easy. She disappeared into her work in ways that were sometimes hard to live alongside, and she had told him this from the beginning with the directness that was both her best quality and the thing that had taken him the longest to trust was genuine rather than performed. She was the kind of person who, when she cared about something, cared about it in the particular way that took up space, completely, with full attention, with none of the reserve that people use to protect themselves from the possibility of caring too much. She had cared about him for 4 months before he knew it, quietly, without asking for anything back, making coffee before he asked, buying the right brand without mentioning it, sitting on the floor when things were bad and being present without turning it into something she needed credit for. That was not a person performing warmth. That was a person who was warm. He was 32 years old, and he had been in love before, and he knew the difference. March arrived with the particular quality of early spring in the city. Not warm, not fully, but with a directional shift in the air, the suggestion of something coming. The juniper on the windowsill had, over the winter, grown to the point where Isabella had repotted it into a slightly larger terracotta container that now required the second shelf of the windowsill rather than the first. A development she had reported to him with the studied casualness of someone trying to underplay how pleased they were. Cora, on her last visit, had named it. "It needs a name," she had announced, standing in front of it with the expression of someone performing an official function. "Everything alive should have a name." "Gerald has a name," Evan had said. "Gerald's mine. This one is Bella's." She had studied the juniper for a long moment. "Francis," she had decided. "Francis," Isabella had repeated. "He looks like a Francis." Cora had been completely certain, the way she was completely certain about everything important. "You can tell by the branches." Francis the juniper now occupied the second shelf of the windowsill, growing at the pace of something that had decided it was going to stay. It was a Saturday evening in late March when Isabella came home from a long day at the offices to find Evan in the kitchen making something ambitious. Ambitious for him, which meant it involved more than 2 pans and a sauce that required active management. The apartment smelled like garlic and browning butter, and something else she couldn't name. And Cora was at the kitchen table doing homework with the focused scowl she deployed when mathematics was involved, and Gerald was propped against the fruit bowl as moral support. She dropped her bag and her jacket and sat down at the table next to Cora and looked at the math worksheet with an expression that suggested she remembered exactly how she felt about worksheets at that age. "Which one's the problem?" she said. Cora pointed at a question involving fractions without looking up. Isabella looked at it. "Okay, what's the bottom number telling you?" "That it's hard." "The bottom number is the denominator. It's telling you how many pieces the whole thing is cut into." She pulled the worksheet slightly toward her. "So if I have a pizza cut into 4 pieces and you eat one, I ate 2. Fine, you ate 2. What fraction of the pizza did you eat?" Cora thought about it. 2 out of 4. Which is the same as a pause. Half. "There you go." Cora looked at her. "How do you know math?" "I know a lot of math." "More than my teacher?" "Probably different math." She pushed the worksheet back. Try the next one with that. Cora tried the next one, got it right, made the expression she made when she got something right, and didn't want to seem too pleased about it. The mouth pressed together, the small, involuntary nod, the immediate pivot to the next question before anyone could make a big deal of the previous one. Evan looked over his shoulder from the stove and caught Isabella's eye. She looked back at him and he turned back to the pan and neither of them said anything and there was nothing to say. The moment was not about anything particular. It was just the apartment, on a Saturday evening in March, with a 5-year-old doing fraction homework and a stuffed elephant watching from the fruit bowl, and something on the stove that smelled good, and a juniper on the windowsill named Francis growing its slow, persistent 4th and 5th and 6th branches. Later, after dinner, which was in fact good, the ambitious thing had worked out with only minor drama involving the first attempt at the sauce, which he had discarded and started over without telling her until she noticed the extra pan in the drying rack and asked about it. At which point he had said there was a version 1, and she had said there's always a version 1 with the expression of someone who had started over enough times to find it more funny than frustrating. After dinner, after Cora was asleep with Gerald and the apartment had gone back to its quiet, they were on the couch in the way they were on the couch now, close, her feet up, his shoulder available, the television on something neither of them was watching. "She's going to be formidable," Isabella said. "She already is." She negotiated Gerald's attendance at the dinner table tonight. Gerald sat in a chair. Gerald often sits in a chair. She negotiated it formally. She presented the argument that Gerald had been alone all day and deserved dinner company and waited for a response before she moved him. A slight pause. "She's 6 months from running a small company." He laughed quietly. "Don't tell Nadia." Nadia probably already knows. She shifted slightly, settling. "She's going to be fine, whatever she turns out to want to be." He looked at the ceiling, thought about Cora at 5, at 6, at 16, at 26, the ongoing unfurling of whoever she was going to become, the parts he would see and the parts he wouldn't, the presence he needed to be in the story of her life, regardless of how many other things changed around it. "Yeah," he said. "She is." A comfortable quiet. "Evan." "Yeah." She was looking at the television, or the wall behind it, in the way she sometimes looked at things when what she was seeing was interior. "I've been thinking about what this is." He waited. "Not in a concerning way," she said. "Just, I've been thinking about it. What we're doing." She turned to look at him. "I've never been good at naming things. I don't like doing it before I'm sure about them." "I know. But I'm sure." She said it plainly, directly, in the register she used for things she had thought about long enough to commit to. "I'm sure about this. About you." She held his eyes. "I wanted to say it out loud so it existed somewhere outside my own head." He looked at her for a moment, at the specific, particular realness of her face, not the press photo, not the Business Monthly cover, just this, the actual person, sitting on the couch in the apartment they had signed a new lease for together, telling him something true. "I'm sure too," he said. Not elegant, not the speech he might have given if he had prepared one. Just the thing that was real, said plainly, in the way real things deserve to be said. She nodded once, turned back to the television, settled her head back against his shoulder. He put his arm around her and the apartment held them, and Francis grew another millimeter on the windowsill, and the city moved through its Saturday night outside, and Cora slept in the other room with Gerald, and the lease was signed, and none of it was perfect, and all of it was exactly what it was supposed to be. So, the yellow tulips were long gone. They had wilted and been thrown out the morning after the conversation they had precipitated, unceremoniously, because Evan was not a man who lingered on objects, and because the flowers themselves had never been the point. They had been bought for a woman who wasn't coming and had ended up meaning something entirely different, which was perhaps the most honest thing you could say about them. But the moment they had created persisted. It persisted in the way that small moments persisted when they happened to be the hinge on which everything else turned. Not heroic, not cinematic, just a Tuesday night and a kitchen and two people who had been careful for a long time, finally choosing, for different reasons and in the same moment, to stop. Evan Mercer had spent 2 years looking for the right moment, the right occasion, the right sequence of circumstances that would mean he was finally ready to let someone in. He had looked in restaurants and on dating apps and in conversations that went long and connections that felt promising and all the standard places where you looked for the thing you wanted. He had never once looked in his own kitchen. This was not, he understood now, as obvious a failure as it sounded. You could not force this kind of thing by looking harder in the right places. You could not will yourself into seeing what you were not yet ready to see. The readiness had to arrive on its own, in the form of enough accumulated evidence that even the most careful and defended version of yourself could not argue with it. He had needed the Tuesday. He had needed the canceled dinner and the ironed shirt and the tulips propped against the empty chair, had needed to walk through his own front door carrying flowers for someone who never showed up in order to arrive at the kitchen where someone was. She had been waiting, not passively. Isabella Sterling was not, and had never been, a woman who waited passively for anything. She had been living, fully and practically and with her characteristic forward motion, right next to him, and she had carried her own quiet knowledge of what she felt with the patience of someone who understood that certain things could not be hurried, only allowed. They had both, in their different ways, been doing the work of becoming ready. And one Tuesday night, they had both been ready at the same time. That was all love was, sometimes. Two people becoming ready at the same time. It was not always dramatic. It was not always at the right moment or in the right setting or with anything like the right music. Sometimes it was pasta and a canceled dinner and flowers that never got where they were going. Sometimes it was the wrong occasion making room for the right one. Sometimes the thing you were looking for was sitting at the counter in a gray sweatshirt with a pencil in her hair, reading a contract in the morning light. And all you had ever had to do was stop looking past her and finally look at her. Evan Mercer had finally looked. He was not going to look away again.